Hey everybody, it's Danielle from Made Possible by Pop Culture, welcoming you to another episode of the podcast. Something I don't think you know about me is just how much I love documentary storytelling. I actually did a documentary short on Days of Our Lives fandom when I was in college, and it absolutely fueled my love of telling people stories overall. I then ended up pouring that love into more traditional written journalism instead for honestly reasons I don't need to get into today. But in doing that, I got to write about a lot of documentaries and docuseries. I got to interview a lot of filmmakers. And I'm saying all of that to say that I'm so excited to continue that conversation and coverage today on the podcast. Today's guest has written and directed and appears in a new doc about the art of clowning and its place and evolution in pop culture. The doc is called American Clown, and he is Guilford Adams.
Hi, thank you, Danielle. I'm glad to be here.
So I do want to start with talking a little bit about clowning in general because I just said its place in pop culture. And I want to know if you feel like that is a fair assessment, if you feel like it's an art that you can say is also part of pop culture, or do you prefer to focus on it as an art full stop?
Oh, no, I think it's absolutely plays in pop culture. I think it's just like anything, it's fashionable at times and it's not fashionable. And so right now a lot of classic clowning probably isn't as fashionable as it used to be, but the horror clowns are very fashionable. So it really, it runs the gamut.
I mean, I don't know if I would use the word fashionable for the horror clowns, but I do see your points. And I do want to tell the audience that, I mean, the reason you are appearing in the documentary is because this is something that you do. You do clown. I don't know how much of it is, would you say your first art, your first love? Because you also do act. And I do feel like for those people who are watching on YouTube, if you recognize him, you probably recognize him best out of the clown outfit on things like American Auto, Minx, The Morning Show. I don't know if people would recognize you right now for your clown work because you're you right now. So tell us a little bit about like A, what came first, and B, what are the clown projects that you are most proud for people to go find you in after they listen to this episode or watch this episode?
Sure. I mean, I guess I came into clowning before I became an actor, just kind of on a whim. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and so I was a carrying clown a little bit in junior high, and before I got really kind of into sports and girls and that sort of stuff. But I did my first professional show like at a nursing home. And then, of course, life takes twists and turns and stuff. And I got to be an athlete. And then when I was in college, I was a diver in high school
Hmm.
and all state and stuff. And I got into college and I was a diver as well. And I really was with a bunch of swimmers. And I realized that, they were just very jocular, even swimmers, and more so than I was. And I just felt like I was with the wrong group. And no disrespect to them. I still am friends with a lot of them, but I got into a show. The show was Peter Schaffer's show called Royal Hunt of the Sun, and it was with an Argentinian acting troupe at the University of Tennessee. And I just fell in love with performing. Diving, there's a performance aspect to it, but then being on stage and doing all that stuff, there was also just, obviously a performance aspect to it. And since I didn't do theater in high school,
Hmm.
I was diving, you
Right.
know, I had this sort of physical prowess that I think a lot of high school actors didn't have. I could flip and do tumbling and all that sort of stuff. So that was part of my skill set I brought to acting. And so that really transferred in a lot of ways to me being a comedic clown as an actor because I could take the pratfalls and do the tumbles and all that stuff. So when I moved out here to LA and I was an actor and I was like, what job do I do? Somebody's like, well, why don't you be a clown, at kids' parties and stuff. And that was kind of like the beginning of really this whole other side of myself. And in a way, I had touched on it when I was younger, but then it just really blossomed. I had auditioned for there was always an interest, it wasn't like I just walked away.
Right.
And but I had done like auditioned for Ringling Brothers in 97 and I didn't get in that year. And that was the last year they did it. And when I was in college, I'd watch the Marx Brothers and it was like these were like, oh, this is my way in.
Hmm.
Is this physical sort of comedy and the wordplay and all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of like how it happened. And I've been fortunate for any other performers out there that I've been able to, and I recommend this, that oftentimes as an actor it'll be lean, and
Right.
there's a lot of times that I can't control that. So I just focus my energies to clowning, like I just go, oh, well, okay, this is, I've got a couple fishing poles in the water,
Yeah.
and if this one isn't catching fish, it's like, well, okay, this one's catching, so let's keep doing that. That to me, it's really, it's kept me sharp, and it's kept me more profitable than not doing that. And
Well,
you know,
even just the physical, what you were talking about a few minutes ago about like how being a diver helped you be physical on stage. I mean, I think that is also something, the pratfalls that you might be doing as a clown even today. There's, I think, maybe a little less physical comedy in traditional television sitcom, traditional film comedy right now, but it's still important to be able to do that kind of physical business on set, to do
oh
some
yeah,
sort of, to figure out if you're in a scene, well, I'm not just going to say my lines. Let me use some of this other instinctive nature that I have to do something with this.
yeah. I mean, growing up, it was John Ritter, John Ritter,
Mm.
John Ritter, John Ritter. I mean, Three's Company was the show that I watched. That was what I grew up with. And it's really broad now if you go back and see it. And it's just so big, but that was just, and it was, and
Also
so
of the time. I mean, I think a lot of comedy back then was a lot broader than it is now. It's just things have just shifted. But I think that also it speaks to a good example of the nimbleness of like John Ritter wasn't always broad. You're not always being asked to be broad either. Like you can do it, but then
right,
there are times where something that maybe you would do in a big way on one set, you take the nugget at the center of it and you do it a smaller way on a show like the morning show where, there's some they don't like it when we call it camp, but there's some bigness to that show, just not in the same way.
right. No, absolutely, you're absolutely right.
So you just mentioned John Ritter, but you also before you came on when we talked about you coming on, you said one of your influences growing up with Mr. Rogers, which I love because obviously I grew up watching it too, but I would love to talk to you a little bit more about what kind of influence he was because he was not I thought you were gonna pull a clown, like a famous historic clown out and be like, let's talk about, like you said, the Marx Brothers. This I feel like he was a more serious performer. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was about learning. Tell me a little bit about what that was for you in terms of when you first found him and like why it meant so much to you.
Well, I was a kid of the 70s and a child of the 80s. I was born in 74, so I'm 51 now, and I don't feel it. I feel like a kid still. My body feels older, but I feel like a kid. But
Well,
I
that's good because I'm the opposite. So I feel 90 and I say it all the time. And I just sit here and maybe that's why I feel 90 because I'm not out there doing pratfalls. I'm just sitting or laying down on a couch more likely.
I think we're all guilty of that. But one thing, growing up when I did, and this is no disrespect to my parents who I love, but my generation really wasn't allowed to have emotion, and it
Mm.
was something that we did too much, hurt feelings, and it was always inconvenient, and this is not, and that's part of the reason why I'm an actor, lots of therapy has drawn me to that conclusion. But one of the things that I am as a clown is I'm very vulnerable. And as an actor, I'm very vulnerable. And I think a lot of that cultivation of to really embrace my vulnerability was a lot of that of the stuff from Mr. Rogers. He allowed me to feel and to think, and I would watch it as a kid. And I think my dad would be like, "Who's this guy? Talking all this. I don't want my kid to be a sissy." Not that my dad was like, but
It
just
was
like
the time. Yeah. I mean,
I don't
I
want to
think a
play in the
lot of
dolls.
dads were like that. My
Yeah, I
dad
don't
was
want to.
kind of like that. And I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And, I'm a girl. So it was a slightly different approach, but still very much like he didn't want to talk about emotions, even with me.
No. No, and I mean, a lot of men, like I've never seen my dad cry. I've never seen him cry, and I cry all the time. So I think my dad really tried to stamp out this vulnerability in me because that's going to make me tougher and have to deal with this. And I've used my vulnerability really as an asset,
Hmm.
like a way of reaching people and and to really embrace the humanity that I feel, that I share with everybody. And I don't know if I would be able to do that if it wasn't modeled by somebody like Mr. Rogers.
So do you remember like Little Guilford the first time you turned it on? What was that experience? Like, do you remember the moment of like it clicking for you of like, wow, there's something here that I've either never seen before or I'm just not getting, and therefore I'm gonna sit down now and watch this forever.
Oh, as far as Mr. Rogers, you're
Yes.
saying?
Yeah.
I think at that age, I watched a lot of TV as a kid. I was with my grandparents and they just watched Speed Racer. They just shoved me in front of the TV. So I probably just globbed on to whatever. But there was something about Mr. Rogers and it just that was just transportive. That you just felt like I was just in another sort of universe. I mean, the only other TV show I could really think about that made me feel that was
Mm.
a show in the 80s and early 90s with Quantum Leap, that Scott Bakula, which really had a lot to do with me being an actor too. I just loved that he would wake up and he'd be like a person of color in the 40s, like, uh-oh, that sort of like, and I was like, oh, that's, to me, that's what acting is. Like that
Well,
that
yeah, but those are
that
very different shows. I mean, just
Oh,
in terms of
very
tone and
different, but it's just like it just transports you.
right.
Like you just felt like, oh, I'm in another world, and it was just it that I really enjoyed that. So I don't specifically, I mean, as far as like having a sort of aha moment with Mr. Rogers, it felt like family
Mm.
watching, and I felt safe.
Yeah.
There was nothing that I don't know if I always felt safe. Not that it was a dangerous house, but just safe with my emotions.
Yeah.
And I think Mr. Rogers always lets you feel that.
I mean, I think it helps too. Like that's the set. It's his house. He's
Yes.
welcoming you in, or maybe you're sitting on the porch, but it is very much designed to say you are safe here. Kind of similar to how I think Sesame Street was, where it was welcoming of everybody on in this one street. One of the quotes, though, I feel like everybody pulls this quote out, so I'm sure you've heard this a million times. But one of the things that I feel like a lot of people talk about when they talk about Mr. Rogers is the idea that he kind of knew kids could find like who's fake. Like he kind of understood like if you're not being real with kids, they're going to spot you, they're going to call you out. And that was important for his show, but I would argue I feel like it's probably also important for what you're doing as an actor and as a clown. And I'm wondering if maybe this is not intentional, but if any of that from watching him has kind of attributed to the way that you are
Yeah.
as a performer.
Absolutely. I think there's something I do something that's similar, but I basically try to age up any kid I'm talking to. So if there's like a 12-year-old kid, I try to be like 13 or 14. Like, dude, come on, like that's. So I think there's a way that I'm trying to, and if it's very young, like I don't ever like my Gilly is I just did a clown party today, like, and
Nice.
it was a bunch of kids for Rosh Hashanah or whatever
Hmm. I
and
was gonna say because it's the middle of, we're taping this in the middle of a week, and I when you had said you had a clown party in the middle of the week, I was like, how's that? Like it must be for a school, right? Like who's having random parties? And then yes, it is a Jewish holiday, and so I was like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense now.
Yeah, they kind of needed a break from all the
Hmm.
sort of from all of the lessons or whatever. And so I couldn't play music. I had, they still, I was like, okay, well, that's fine. I don't need to. But there was I always try to out cool them if that were a thing. And so I'm playing to their sort of to their idea of relationships and whatever else, but I'm never trying to adult to them. I'm trying to be on their level, and I think that's something that that was very much in step with stuff that Mr. Rogers would have said. I don't try to domineer. I believe in their emotions and the feelings they're feeling, and um I'm not trying to I'm not trying to teach them anything. I'm trying to be I'm just another kid.
It is more, I think, for fun. But I
Yeah.
mean, you just never know. I mean, you never know who might be inspired by what you're doing. And, especially the physical comedy aspects of things that they don't realize, oh, I could do that too. There's certainly skills involved in things that people need to learn. But like, for example, if you're working with balloon animals,
Yeah.
that's not something I think most kids just grab a balloon and try. They need to see it before they will then be like, oh, maybe I could do that too. Which I do think there was probably a lot of that. I mean, I remember a lot of that on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I mean, I don't remember there ever being a clown, and people on the internet can yell at me. Maybe there was, and I just don't remember it. But I remember there was, puppets, a puppeteer, and there were scientists, and there was, the mailman character and a baker. Like you were kind of learning about people, but you were learning about all these things you could be.
Yeah.
And I think this might go in line a little bit with your documentary, but I'm curious about like what you do see when you do your shows in terms of, or do the parties in terms of like, what are kids today looking at and saying, could I be a clown? Like, are they saying, are they getting it? Are they seeing like, this is a potential path for me? This is something I would love to do. Do you feel like you're able to connect with them in that way?
I mean, yes, like teaching, like when I teach, or I'm teaching clown skills, or I'm teaching circus skills, like plate spinning or whatever else. I don't know if it's ever something that they think at, sometimes it's K through 5 that I'll kind of do,
Okay.
which also happens at parties, sometimes an all ages party. But I identify it. I say, listen, if I had known that as a seventh grader, when I learned how to juggle and do some quick balloon animals, that would make me X amount of money, in my 20s and 30s, 40s, I would have paid more attention. I would have been like, that's, I mean, hopefully, I'm not sure if I would have been curious, but this is a livelihood, that you could do. And so just working on the skills now, and and it's not something that you forget really. It's like riding a bike, just learning how to juggle. You never know if that can come in handy, and
Right.
you guys have the time when your mom or dad says, hey, no more TV. It's like, awesome. I'm going to work on my,
Mm.
you know. So I definitely introduce that to them, that it's never too early to kind of think about what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, you did mention at the start of our conversation that like and this is in the documentary as well, that the idea of a clown has evolved over time. Like that right now it's the horror clowns that are more popular per se, or just more visible.
Visible, yeah.
I would love to get into the framing of the documentary with that idea in mind, because I'm curious about when you're setting out to make this documentary, is that something that you felt had to be a focal point from the beginning that you then had to kind of pull back on because no, you don't want to show clowns as horrors and evil and like things that scare you. You want to get to the art, even though I'm sure in like a marketing perspective, like, well, if you're focusing on what's happening now, that's great for SEO purposes. That's great for like attention.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I don't think I was really hip on trying to put a bunch of horror stuff in the doc. Like I know that's some people's preference, but it's like I feel like I'm seeing enough of it. I don't need to kind of steer into that. But then, as we were doing it, one of the producers that we had, Bill Parks, he was like, "Oh, well, we need to get David Howard Thornton." And this
mm,
is before second and third of his movies of Art the Clown. And so, at the time I was like, but then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, absolutely. This is the elephant in the room, right? We need to talk about this and talk about this person.
I mean that's a good way of putting it. I mean, that was my thought or my question also is like, how were you thinking about when you first started seeing I'm a clown and horror clowns are becoming so popular? How were you thinking about it? Because I always saw, and I'll just speak for myself for a second, like I read it very young. And I
Uh,
think because I read it so young and because like the entity that is it is an entity, it's a supernatural entity. I was never afraid of clowns because of it, because I understood like, oh, it's a thing that takes the shape of a clown and it's taking the shape of a clown to lure the child because clowns are popular and exciting to children. But it's changed so much over the years. And we have all these other, like you mentioned, David's character, like we have all these other ones that are now using that iconography as well. What is that? What did that do to you as a performer?
I mean, I don't love it, it kind of feels like it's shooting fish in a barrel, and it's like the lowest common denominator, and it's uh, uh, but it's also keeping, as many of my clown friends will say, keeping us in
I was gonna
the
say, if you are
fight.
just willing to make your makeup scary, you might get different jobs.
Sure, and there is that, and the people that like horror clowns typically like regular clowns. They're not like like, oh, just horror for me. They're like, I like all
True.
clowns, because it's not hard. If you're scared of clowns and you like scary clowns, there's really no difference in the way
That's true. Yeah, it's just a clown that you're afraid of. Yeah.
it's how you respond to that.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what it is. So I don't, I mean, like I don't love the fact that that is our brightest ambassador right now. I don't.
Okay.
I'll say, but I don't. I think there's enough room at the table. Like I
Yeah.
don't. I don't think we need to shoo that thing out. I've always phrased it a little bit like I don't know. This is a golf analogy, right? I'm not a big
Oh,
golf.
I'm not gonna. Okay, I don't know anything about golf, so
Listen,
you
well,
just
you know
sell
that
it.
there's more than one club in a golf.
Oh
Like
yeah, of course.
people, there's more than one club. To me, a horror clown is just one of the clubs. It's like a pitching wedge or whatever. Not even one that you use all the time. But to play a game of golf, you need a bunch of clubs. You don't just
Mm,
play with one club. And so to me, it's a little bit like what clowns are like. Like, great, you got that one club there, but that's not your be all club for like every situation. You need other clowns to kind
right.
of do that. If we were all in a bag together, a clown bag, so to speak. You've got big circus clowns, you've got children's party
Mhm.
clowns, you've got those two things are a different set of skills completely. You have, people that do healthcare clowning, medical clowning.
Mhm.
You've got that's another skill. You've got therapeutic clowns. You have like grief clowns now. I've been reading about. So I just think it's like to me it's really reductive to just say like, oh, that one clown does
Right.
everything. And honestly, the horror clowns are the least skilled out of all the clowns I've seen. I mean, I don't.
Well,
There's
because they're not being asked to do anything other than
no, they're not.
scary. And
They're
in the
just the
movies,
face.
it's all visual effects anyway.
Yeah.
Well, mostly. I mean, I know Bill Skarsgård does a lot of physical, like the way he turns his head and the way he hunches his back. But like when his teeth come out as Pennywise, that's visual effects.
Yeah, and I think to a large degree, I know David and talking to him and
Hmm.
having him sit down, he's like, I love clowns, and that was a big. And as I'm talking to him, I was like, yeah, this guy's he's a clown. I mean, that's part of where it originates from, and that's why it's effective
Right.
art. But I think it gets lost in the look sometimes, and I think
Mm.
sometimes you really have to parse it out for people and the biggest thing is well, I wouldn't say that I think all adults are able to do that because they're not. But my biggest worry is that kids, when I'm at parties, kids will always ask me, like, aren't all clowns scary? And I have a bridge out of it as a clown.
Mm.
Oh, you're talking about Pennywise. That's my cousin. He's gone to Hollywood. He drives a Cybertruck or, whatever I say. Um, but the idea is because I like the fact we're all related somehow, or we all know each other.
I do think that makes it less scary for them if like
Yeah,
they're
a little
thinking of it
bit.
in different terms. And I think it's also, I think, connective tissue in general to say like, hey, as you were just saying, we're all of one thing. You can like multiple versions, you can have multiple versions. I also feel like, I mean, you said it earlier, but like the fact that the horror ones are the dominant ones right now, I think is what is making the difference. Because without having the history that we get out of your documentary, and we don't, kids today don't know Bozo. I barely remember Bozo.
Yeah.
I forgot, and this is crazy. This feels like something out of Derry, but like I forgot about Grandma from the Ringling Brothers until I watched your documentary. Now, I should say Barry Lubin's not in your documentary. We
No.
know he's had some allegations against him. I'm not saying he should be there, but Grandma as a clown was the clown that I saw growing up in that circus, and I had completely forgotten
Yeah.
until I turned on your documentary and you're doing Ringling Brothers stuff and you're talking about circus clowns. And I was like, oh, right, kids don't have that anymore. What are they getting? And then I'm like, right, they're getting Pennywise. So,
Right. They don't have that visual. I mean, honestly, if we didn't have, and I don't want to step in a landmine here, but let's say priests and nuns and that sort if there wasn't, if you just
no,
saw
that's
them in the
fair.
movies, you would think that they're all possessed or they're all like, but you see them, people, the Catholics, whatever, they
Yeah.
see them in everyday sort of situations. So we're not having that with clowns. Like you don't see other, I mean, maybe you've got your a couple clowns here and there that do birthday parties, but Barnum and Bailey is closed, or I guess they're back open, but there's no clowns, not full face painted clowns.
Okay.
Big Apple Circus isn't
Oh,
traveling with.
Big Apple. That's what I was thinking, not
Yeah,
Reilly.
Big Apple. Yeah,
Yeah.
Big Apple Circus is, they've got a little bit here and there. They might be doing more than Barnum and Bailey. You've got a couple, sort of like out here. You have Circus Vargas and stuff,
Mhm.
and it's got some, and it plays to a different culture. It's a lot of the Mexican culture here, and there's less of it.
Yeah.
I'll
I mean,
say,
there's not
and
even Ronald McDonald anymore. I mean,
no,
we
he's
know
gone.
he's still technically McDonald's, but
Yeah,
I don't know the last time I saw his face on anything.
no, it's been quite a long. I did see that they were bringing back McDonald Land, so but I've conspicuously, I've noticed that Ronald is not part of it. I know there are people that work with Ronald. I think they're calling it the Central program now.
Mhm.
There's maybe 3 or 4 people that are old ringing clowns that work with
Okay.
Ronald. But outside of that, outside of like a shareholders meeting or
Right.
sending someone to China because they're over, there's not a whole lot of
Yeah. Which I actually find really interesting because I read an article literally this morning where somebody was saying, well, somebody from Burger King, I don't remember his name, it was like a CEO or a CFO, was saying Burger King stopped using the King mascot because when it was the plastic mask with like the dead eyes, people were too afraid of it and they were taking their family to McDonald's instead. And that was still when Ronald McDonald was around. So
Yeah,
like they were clearly saying like clowns aren't that scary.
yeah.
This thing is scarier. Like people are able to separate, but I still think even without the history of like Ronald aside, just in general, the art of clowning, I think a lot of it gets overlooked just because they don't really understand what goes into it, which I'm sure is a big reason why you wanted to make this documentary.
Yeah, I just didn't. Yes. Part of when I started this documentary, it was 2017. And the Ronald Field program we had just learned. I had a producer asking me for years, like, "Hey, we should document this stuff," and it's like, I don't know. And then I had I found out. We all found out. We were all part of Assistance to Ronald in the Southern California Ronald program, and everyone is losing their jobs in the Midwest. And we thought, like, oh, well, those guys are like, whatever. I mean, that's Missouri. Who's it? We're out in Southern California, sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, 3 months later, it's like, you guys don't have jobs. We're like, what?
Yep.
Oh, that's it's been happening. And then so I told this producer friend, like, well, we should document this. I don't think we can use any of it because it's McDonald's and they've got pretty deep pockets, but I think we should do it because this is happening. It's a 40-year-old program that's like going. And so that was kind of the beginning, and very little of that footage actually ended up in the doc. There's little pieces here and there, but not much. And but that was it. And then it was right at that time that Barnum and Bailey closed. And then that Big Apple Circus. Now they had some other allegations, and that, as you mentioned earlier, and then it was like this. It was just being released again, and so it was just like this crazy storm of something. And I don't want to minimize too. An election in 2016 that you
Right.
might.
The whole world was changing, but it does feel like that is indicative of like this is a microcosm of what was happening in the world. Like all of these old institutions and old art forms and like important things were falling apart and still are arguably falling apart.
Yeah. And it could be said, with all that stuff happening, that was the impetus for like, okay, well, let's start this documentary. And having thought about it a lot and coming back to it, and knowing that clowns have always been a sign of the times. In the 20s and the 30s, you had Weary Willie, who was a clown Emmett Kelly made famous. And then, the corporate clowns in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, whether it was Bozo and, or Ronald McDonald. And then now we're in this sort of surreal, terrible sort of like horror clowns. And that is also to me a sign of the times that we're in. The hobo clown in the 30s, the depression, and it
Right.
didn't look too different than people's uncles and stuff. And so, and then there was just the flight of fancy and the go commerce, go capitalism 70s and 80s, and how this thing is just gonna we can't get enough of it. And then now we're kind of in this like really
Hellscape.
existential hellscape, and that's our clown. So to me, it's not that confusing, really. It's like, yeah, because this is the world that people feel like they live in right now.
Yeah,
This is
that's true.
crazy. And so, I wanted with the documentary though, just to, I think we have as Americans and just as people a real tendency to throw the baby out with the
Mm,
bathwater. And it just felt like we're losing this deep
yeah,
tradition. And I just want to put my best clown shoe forward and try to, like, remind people that, hey, this is where we came from. It's not lose the trail.
right.
Like, it's great these guys are here and stuff, but we don't have to cancel everybody, all
Right.
the clowns, because we've got two,
Well,
whatever.
that's also what I find really interesting because when people do think about things like that, like you even in, the clips that you have in the documentary, like it's Pennywise, it's the American Horror Story clown whose name I'm blanking on.
Yeah,
It's
I'll
barely
give you
John Wayne Gacy though. Like if we're gonna cancel anyone,
John Carroll.
it's
John.
oh,
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I meant the character, but yeah,
No,
yeah,
yeah, right, right,
yeah.
right,
John
right,
Carroll
right.
Lynch's character.
John, you're
But
right.
like I mean, if you really are going to cancel
Twisty,
anyone, it's
Twisty,
the
is it
John
Twisty?
Wayne Gacy who ruined it who realized like, hey, what's a thing kids love or what's a thing people do love at that time, and then bastardize it by like basically creating stranger danger.
But
Which I'm
even
very glad you did not like suddenly turn the documentary into like a true crime look at what that was, because I think that would have taken it in a very different tone, sure, but also like direction of, what this should be. I think like the fact that you were really focusing on look where we came from, but also like look at all the good that these clowns are doing and can still do with, sure, it's an employment route, but it's also like, as you mentioned, there's healthcare clowns that are helping kids and David Arquette trying to bring Bozo back and like it's a pure art form. And I don't know, there was just a lot of it that to me kind of reminded us like, remember when you were younger and you wanted to go do something fun and creative? Like, this was why. Maybe your thing wasn't clown, but like, this is a great example of like that feeling that you got that made you want to be creative. And they're just choosing to do it as a clown.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think all that's true. We have. I was just as you were saying that, I was coming back to a little bit of something that you'd said when we were young, and there is because of we live in this hypercritical whatever sort of environment, we can't let people have nice things a lot, right? We can't let something just be pure. Like if like there I've never seen this. We talked about Mr. Rogers earlier. Like
Mhm.
we live in such a weird environment now that if Mr. Rogers was around, people would try to folks find something wrong with him.
Mm.
Like why is this guy talking to kids like this? I don't like this. This does
Yeah.
not feel.
I mean, they did that to Pee Wee Herman. So, I mean,
They
yeah,
did.
Pee Wee
They
Herman
did.
was
And as
40
you
years
were
ago.
saying, earlier, John Wayne Gacy, and that's interesting.
I mean, it's a specific example. I'm not trying to take us down a rabbit hole.
No, I know, but and he was a clown, and he did lure teenage boys to
Mhm.
his house and whatever else. Those two things never really intersected, right? It wasn't like he was taking them from clown parties,
Right.
but it's a disarming confluence of events. But and we remember that. We remember those two things, just to spitball for a second. We know what Bill Cosby did. We know
Yeah.
he played a gynecologist on his show. We don't hate all gynecologists. We don't assume that they're like sleeping with people, like
Yeah.
because being a clown is so salacious, though,
That's
and he
interesting.
did this. We're like wrapped around it, so we spin it because it's a
Mhm.
great story. But no one's afraid of gynecologists, because of Bill Cosby,
I don't
because
know
he's
about no.
famous.
Oh, not for that reason.
No,
Yeah.
not for that reason.
I
Sorry,
was like, I
I
don't
and
want
I,
to say
my
nobody.
my experience is very limited.
Well, I just
But I'm
have
saying
medical anxiety, so that like that's a
no, no,
whole
no.
separate. But
I
no, I
told
do
thank
I
you,
do
sir.
know what you're saying, and I do think it's a really interesting analogy, just in the sense of like that was one guy, right? Like one very extreme example of a clown, and so. And again, like I know it's, and you can't even draw up a line and say like it influenced Stephen King. He's said it has not. Like that's not,
No,
that was the opposite of what he was doing. What he was doing was literally like, what's the thing that kids love that would trust? They would get excited to see a clown, and then it gets them because it's tricked them,
right.
which is a separate conversation. But I don't know. There's a lot to this that I feel like I mean, and it is, I think, because you did a documentary on the subject, like I'm thinking about it a lot more now than I think the average person would. You know what I mean? Like if they're just gonna say, like, what am I gonna do for my child's entertainment? Should I get a clown? Like I don't think they're going down this track that we
Probably
are,
not.
which is good because then they're gonna actually hire the clown. But what I would love to talk to you about, because it's mentioned in the documentary, is there's somebody who calls clown college, he compares it to boot camp.
Mhm.
And that is something that I wonder if you feel like more people who do call clowns to come and do parties should understand like just how much work you guys are putting in to become this character, to, whatever your talent is, whether it's juggling, whether it's balloon animals, whatever you're going to do at the party, that it's how many hours you put in to become an expert at it so that they don't just, you know, think all two clowns are alike and they can call anybody to do this. They could ask their cousin to throw on some makeup and be the clown.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, they say it takes 10,000 hours to master, a skill or whatever. And I mean, I don't know if I've juggled for 10,000 hours. I should be a lot better by that sort of algorithm. But I think there is a tremendous amount of stuff. I also think, that there is a calling that these people kind of go through that do this. And you can see in the documentary, whether it's Wabi, the clown that does it for nursing homes, and, or any of the other clowns. I think there's something that you're drawn to this. No one is thrilled to tell their dad or their mom they're a clown, or, like this.
I mean,
I
that
mean,
kind of was a through line with a lot of the people you interviewed. Yeah, I noticed
yeah,
that. And I was like, I kind
yeah.
of was bummed to hear that. I was kind of hoping they came from families where they weren't necessarily worried about that, like everybody understood what it was and that it is, no, I mean, I do think a lot of families don't like hearing anything creative. My family didn't want to hear I wanted to be a writer, but at the same time, like, that's the one thing where it's like, especially today, like I would hope that you would just support your children's dreams.
Well, they did ultimately. My
Well,
my
yeah,
father
ultimately.
and my mother, but it's probably, like, this is what, like, you do it in spite of
Mm,
what you might be told, or in spite of the challenges, you still do it because there's something that you feel drawn to, much like I realize this could put me at a loss for other things in my life, but God, I just really love doing it. And I think that's in addition to the skills that are involved, it's a huge part of it,
mm,
of just like of wanting to make people laugh. I mean, maybe that comes from, I've said this before, and I think it's partly true that, I probably would have benefited from medications or something as a kid. They didn't diagnose people back then. And I think ultimately my vibration runs a little low,
mm.
just like if I was a motor or a motor on a motorcycle, just so part of me that needs to rev up a little bit is making other people laugh,
Mm.
making other people happy. My wife might say, well, you're a people pleaser, and she might be right. I do like making people happy, and I in making them joke and kind of cutting the tension in a situation, and trying to, you know maybe it's a hero type mentality, but that makes me feel slightly better, like I have purpose here.
Right,
I'm helping,
right.
that, and maybe that's coming from a divorced family. I mean, I could unpack it all day, but all these things start to create, like, oh, and you get good at it.
Yeah,
Like, that's another thing, is you get better the more you do it, and you realize, gee, I'm actually pretty good at this, and
hmm.
it's like, well, why wouldn't I keep doing it?
That's true. I mean, you mentioned something interesting, or when well, I kind of started going down the rabbit hole of like people's families. Your wife is in the documentary, you're in the documentary, and I'm wondering, I guess, how much you wanted to put your own story, your own family in it for yourself versus also maybe making some of these other people say, I want to join you. I'm more comfortable in this documentary if you're doing it too. Because for anybody who is not on my side today, who is not a fan of my work as a clown because they wanted me to be something else, they can see me in good company.
Yeah. Well, I'll unpack that. when we first started filming, it was just me. It was like and it was like kind of my life in this. Like I didn't know if it was going to be a short or what it was going to
Okay.
be. And at the time I was hesitant, and even throughout the process, very hesitant about it just being solely me. But then I understand that this is kind of a journey type film. I'm
Mhm.
asking other clowns about their thoughts. And so we needed kind of a through line, and it just made sense to have me. And then because again, I'm the one available,
But,
I'm the one doing it.
but what made you hesitant though in the beginning?
Well, because I just to be in the company of these other greats.
Okay.
I think there was that, to say I'm directing a movie, to call American Clown, and like I'm in, like I just felt like, I've always felt like the redheaded stepchild of a redheaded company, and
Huh.
I've always felt like I'm on the outskirts. And even in the program, I was on the Rana program, I was a part timer. I did 3 days a week, and I didn't. But because of that, it felt like, what, I'm able to do this. I'm
Hmm.
able to tell this story because I'm a little bit further back than a lot of these things, these people are. And then I was doing, and if you notice in the doc, I mean, I'm in all of those, I'm part of the medical clown team. I'm doing
Yeah.
parties. I'm doing stuff with Laffy. Like I'm also doing
Yeah.
working with Ronald. Like I'm in all of them, but like I didn't want to be in all, I wanted other people's stories to be told. So it just kind of frames a little bit. But in so many ways, it's a bit of a time capsule of my life in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
But I was, you know, I guess a little bit. I don't, so I'm tired of me. I'm with me all the time. Like I want to be with other people, and I
Yeah.
want their viewpoints and stuff. But I think there has to be some sort of backbone to the whole thing. Otherwise, it tends to kind of fall apart. Like, where are we? Why do we care about this? How do they even get together? Sort of thing.
Sure.
And so I think that it was born out of necessity. And if I could have taken myself out more, I would have, honestly.
I mean, I do think you use the word through line, but I do think it's also a really good frame for the different levels of working because I mean you just were kind of self-deprecating with I think the way you talked about your own work, but I think it's also like we're seeing people who as I said at the start of this, we would probably recognize out of their clown character more than in. And that includes you. And so like I think it's an interesting framing of like these are people, John C. Reilly, David Arquette, Steve-O, like Bill Irwin even, like I would recognize them much more just as actors. Um, and then so to then see kind of what that means for all of you in the clowning world, it's an interesting frame of like these layers to people and not just their skills, but also their interests, their art. I'm not sure how many people might go into this documentary not knowing that about them. I feel like if you're already a fan of them, you already know that. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it's a deeper dive with them for sure into again like the levels of the art and the love of this.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, I think it's probably split with if they know that David Arquette bought the Bozo rights. I mean, obviously it's been publicized. We
Right.
follow him on social media. Usually like, what's he doing in the Bozo outfit? We had some film festivals. We have distribution.
Mhm.
All that's really exciting, but I got, 25 rejections right off the bat, like, no, no, no,
What do you
no,
mean from
from
people
film
who?
festivals, just like,
Oh,
no, no. And I know that's par for the course and stuff, but and for me, I'm like, well, I mean, I'm an actor, so I get rejected all the time, and every 6 months, I'm like, oh God, but it hurts, and then I
yeah.
just move on again. So it was a new experience having a film that you've
That's
done,
true. And I mean,
and
it also, listen, it depends on where you were applying, like what your competition was. Like
absolutely,
it's
absolutely,
all relative.
but
I
but
mean, I also wonder, like, do you feel you need film festivals in this day and age where like just pop it online? People will find it.
yeah, and you're right, and I hope that is the case. I've always been an actor, searching for an audience, and as a
Yeah.
musician, I mean, I don't. I have 6 kids albums. Like I have so much stuff that I do,
Right.
and it's always a challenge to find an audience. It's always a challenge because the gatekeepers still are like, that allow more exposure. They're being owned by these 4 or 5 sort of conglomerates that make it very difficult, that any one of them could open just a wider range of doors for you. But until you get there, you just got to kind of march around and push it out. And I was saying this to somebody recently. We're like, they're like, oh, you got kids, 6 kids out. That's great. It's like I can't spend my life pimping around the same stuff though. I want to move on. Like I
Yeah.
got stuff to do, and so I want to move on. But earlier when I was with the film festival things, what I
Mhm.
was trying to get at is that I think for a lot of people that you were saying something about the actors and
Mhm.
clowning. For a lot of people, they don't know that there is a sort of like a dying off of clowns. I think
Okay.
or to them, they're like, wait, you know what? I haven't seen clowns in a while. I mean, there's the Pennywise, yeah, but besides him, there's that other one, yeah.
Right.
So I think people don't know it's happening, really. I mean, but I think we are in an age where, or a time specifically now, where a lot of the truth tellers are being silenced for having whatever views they have. So I think, this is, and I'm not saying I'm not trying to loop it in. That's the larger thing, but I'm trying to paint a picture or try to at least push forward
Yeah.
positivity just to keep us sort of in any light because I'm worried about just the over saturation of horror clowns and the I guess limited sort of understanding of like some clowns are different than that.
Right. I mean, it's
I,
it's interesting to hear you say that they don't realize it because I don't have kids, but I feel like when I go to this local park almost every weekend with my dog. There's birthday parties
yeah,
all around the park. I never see clowns at any of them. I was like, maybe that's regional. Maybe it's like the age of the kids. I don't know. But then I think back to like when I was little. I mean, we had a lot of parties at like this local amusement park in my neighborhood. So maybe that they had a clown on hand, and maybe that's why we always had the clown at the party. I don't really know the details, but I do feel like it was much more common. And now I'm starting to think, listening to you talk, well, what does happen to the future of clowning? Because, like, if there are no people, kids now, young people, seeing what this art form is and what they could do, they're not training to become this thing. So where does it go? It just dies off, or like do they just become a different kind of clown where, like I said a few minutes ago, like they just paint their face and they think that's it?
I don't know. I don't think that the tradition necessarily is being because of a lack of visibility. I don't think we're teaching the next generation. And I
Yeah.
don't think that's limited to clowning. You could say that about almost any
Well,
industry right now in
yeah.
the business,
I mean, I say it about like plumbers all the time. I'm like, I know I'm getting ripped off, but there are no plumbers. I have to use you.
yeah,
So here we go. I guess, everybody else is just on TikTok, but you're the one plumber I can find.
right. Yeah. And it's tough to get that person and they're on your dream team once you get them. I don't know, but I do worry about without other exposure to these things that kids just don't even know it's a viable path, as we are discussing earlier, like, oh, or
Mhm.
that brings enjoyment though, and that they don't just assume all clowns are scary,
Yeah.
and I think that's really the assumption that I feel, is like all clowns are scary.
You were talking about the film festivals and getting rejected from some, but one of the things that I loved about the documentary was that it points out so much of clowning is like teaching people to be comfortable with failing and failing in public. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if there are any lessons that you feel like from that background have helped you in making this movie. Like maybe not failing, I don't think you failed at all, but just in general, if there are things that do that can apply, that can transfer from one thing to
Yeah,
another.
I mean that's it's funny because I have my backdrop with I rejection is a huge part of my life that I have that I've never dealt with very well. I remember, God, this is a deep share, but I remember being a kid and giving away toys
Mm.
to other kids or kids less fortunate
Oh
or
yeah.
whatever, almost like buying a friendship or
Oh,
securing.
that's not what I thought you meant. Okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's what I did it for. I mean, I've thought maybe, or I think I was just being kind, but was it a
Yeah.
part of me that really wanted to cement in this bond? Yeah, and I frankly, I still do it. Like I used to, I don't drink anymore. I've been on the wagon for almost 2 years. But when I was joining, and people, I'm in a clown house right now, so I've got just people be partying and stuff. I'll
Right,
give them
right.
t-shirts and just hey, take it, it'd be merch. Like I love. I gave stickers today, and I love giving stuff. Like I love that. But I also could extrapolate from that being a kid that I was really scared to be rejected.
Mm,
And now I'm in a profession where I get rejected all the time. And it's almost I get to a point, and this is getting back to your point about the movie, that I keep throwing myself at them like, come on, reject me again. Like you're gonna, I promise you're gonna like me eventually or whatever else. And so I think there's a part of the movie's absolutely that.
mm,
Like how can you dislike this? We're having fun. Like this is great. And so I just tried to be as vulnerable as
yeah,
possible, as I possibly could be. And with the film, I mean, I think so yeah, I mean, that's just a part of it. That's just a part of rejection. And if you're scared of that, I don't know. I get it. I get it. I'm scared of it, but
yeah.
the only way I know to combat that fear is to throw myself at it.
Yeah. And so you don't really get into this in the documentary, but I am wondering the first clown you ever saw, how much of that, who was it? But also how much of that became an influence on the way you wanted to tell the story in the documentary, just in terms of making sure we don't lose sight of certain things in the history, certain skills, certain people.
Yeah, the first clown, I mean, I don't know. I've been asked that before, and I used to ask that in the doc, and that'd be one of my questions.
Okay.
And then I was like, God, I couldn't tell you the first clown I saw.
Okay,
I
fair.
remember meaningful clowns. I remember, one time watching Homie, and I remember obviously Krusty and these sort of, who's kind of like my clown North Star these days. Uh,
Krusty is your clown North Star?
you know,
Okay.
it's funny because in the pendulum of clowns, and how clowns and the progression has happened, Krusty used to just teeter there on the edge of kind of like, I don't know about
Mhm.
Krusty. Like he's a little crusty. He's aptly named. Like, I don't know if he's a good sort of Vermont, but we've moved so far to the right with this,
Sure.
or it's Krusty's like he's well in the good. Like we've
Well,
got backstory on
his
him.
performance too, like on Simpsons, you see Krusty as the clown on stage, but then you see Krusty still in the makeup as the man. And I
The
think that's where it gets real blurry of like, oh, the man's not so great.
the
And
man's
like
not
that's
so
not
great,
necessarily fair for the clown.
but there's an endearing quality to him a little bit, I think, that
Yeah.
I find endearing.
Yeah.
I find it troubled. I find it like a little bit, maybe, almost borderline, but Sideshow Bob has become the real, like, well, he's a maniac. He's like he's not good. But
Right.
Krusty, and again, I think at a point there was that Krusty was that's a
Hmm.
little dangerous
Hmm.
guy, but now he's like, we're okay with Krusty. We've gone
Right. Well,
so far this way.
comparatively, yeah. I mean,
Right.
first of all, like he hasn't become worse over the years.
No, he stayed the
And so,
same.
like, for our sensibility today, it's not so bad, but also because all the horror clowns that we've talked about have followed, and like, that's always going to be worse. He's not mutilating anybody.
No, he's
So,
not. He's not hurting anyone. And I just what I liked about him is just I liked his just his realness. I think there is an element of that, and for me, my clown, and that's very obviously I turned it on, but I don't turn in. This is I would just be in face as a clown right now, kind of saying the same stuff because there's an element that, and I try not to curse or what
right.
listen,
No, of course. Well, I
but
mean, I don't know, actually. If you're doing an older show,
yeah, I mean, I have as
yeah,
a parent, for sure. But with kids, and if I'm in full
yeah,
makeup, there are some sort of there's
yeah.
commandments that clowns use, and I follow most of them. But the idea of being kind of like my clown is like almost Superman in his
Mm,
cape, getting a cup of coffee.
mm.
Like, I just need to, or drinking a Red Bull real quick. Like I know I shouldn't be doing this. Do a lot of training for this, but I need a little something.
Right.
I was up with Lois and whatever. Um, so that's the idea of Mike, and I think Krusty perfectly encapsulates that for me because I think I'm okay with seeing a little bit of the underbelly
Yeah.
in my clowns. I like that makes them real to me. And if anything, I never really thought about this. that pulls the person outside of the
Yeah.
makeup. And I can relate to that. And I think that's the toughest thing. And that was part of doing the documentary, is that I wanted to show the clowns without their makeup.
Yeah.
These are people. These are people like you and I, and I think a lot of times we that gets distorted when we see, the clown makeup. You live in California. There was a time
Mhm.
in 2017, around when they did the duck, there was the scary clowns are coming to California, Southern California.
I don't even remember that.
There was all these sort of like a news, like I would get calls all the time because my company's Los Angeles Clown about, can
Right.
you comment on this? And it was this salacious story. They would say these clowns or these guys in these latex masks and
Right.
like, playgrounds or whatever. Like, well, you're not, I mean, that's aren't clowns for one,
Right.
you aren't seeing their faces and, and then their masks. So I'm confused on all fronts. And
Right.
why are we calling them clowns again? I
Just because
mean,
it looks like the mask looks like what a clown would look
kind
like.
of
And
clowny, but it's like
that's what we've been talking about. I think like just the nuance that's lost when people don't really understand what it is.
yeah,
Like it's just they're associating an image to something and they're using the word clown, but they're using it almost wrong in a lot of cases. And I mean that's why like now I'm thinking you're talking about like out of makeup and sometimes you want to see the man behind the makeup and like there are probably a lot of actors that don't dress up as a in the makeup in the outfits with wigs or whatever but arguably could be considered clowns in the slapstick they do or in some of the skills they have and it's just we don't refer to them that way because that's not the imagery we've been given for them. So I
no,
don't know. I mean, I find it fascinating. I will also say I find it fascinating. You have someone in the documentary who is like bought into it as a full lifestyle. Like wears the hair and the mustache and the little hat. He's the barber and but he wears it all the time and he has the tattoos on his face and like I'm fascinated by that because like at that point, if you can never turn it off,
yeah,
where do you stop and the clown starts? And like what happens if you can't separate it? Like there you could do a whole follow-up, I think, just on him. He's
yeah.
fascinating.
He's Richie is he's a unique individual, yeah, and he's all in. He's all in. I don't, that's not for me. I
No,
love
I know.
clowns, and I'm that's why I wanted him in the doc. Like I'm curious how somebody, because I like to be able to turn it off. I like to be able, like, at 5 o'clock, like, I'm done clowning. I'm still a little makeup, but we're done. I'm not doing the thing anymore. In fact, that's usually my creative repose when I am a clown. It's like I'm on break, because I love that atmosphere. Kind of like, dude, you're in makeup here. I was like, I know, but I'm not really working right now. I
Right,
think
right.
it's just a funny bit. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that's unique. And I that was one of the questions I posed to him that I think made
Hmm.
the documentary, was like,
Hmm.
I don't know what it's like being in face. And at the time, he didn't even know what I meant. He was like, in face. Like,
Yeah,
you're always in face,
yeah,
because he's like, I'm not in face. This is my face. It's like, I know, I know. That is crazy. And he said, like, sometimes I just want to be left alone and have a hoodie on and whatever else. And it's just crazy, but you know, he's got face tattoos and he's got body modifications. And
hmm,
like, I think it doesn't just happen overnight. These are all small incremental things that you start changing. And, as we've seen with other people that do, sort of facial
hmm.
alterations, it could be as addictive as anything,
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
But I mean, I also think it speaks to just like the different types, right? Like the different types of clowns that you're exploring in this documentary.
yeah,
Not everybody, that's kind of the point, is like, as you were saying earlier, like you can't be all lumped in with the horror clowns. Like the point is that there are maybe arguably no two clowns that are alike. Like that's
yeah.
just like anything else. And so being able to explore, being able to get as many different ones as you did, I think is what makes it so interesting to be able to get them to talk to you and to open up about their real journey as people to become clowns and then also like their art as the character and what they do.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Bill Irwin to me is my North Star, and I told him as much during, because he's an actor.
Mhm.
But he's also a master clown, and I watched him so much, even as a kid, watching Popeye, the Robert Altman film, and play like three different parts, and getting his head all shrunken. It was so good. And as a kid, that made a huge impact on me. I mean, it was like, whoa, what is that? How does that person do that sort of thing? It was next level to what I saw with the Three Stooges and stuff. It was like that's real body manipulation stuff that I hadn't seen
Yeah.
before. And as and you emulate it. I mean, that was funny. It was like we were talking earlier with the Three's Company and the Jack Tripper stuff, and him like falling in the tub, and like it was so kind of like high concept. You're like,
Right.
I could do
To
that.
figure it out.
I could figure that out. So yeah, I felt overjoyed having, and then John C. Riley, who we have, and he's actually a friend, and I did his kids' parties when they were little kids,
Nice.
and so everyone, I was lucky to have a connection to a lot of these clowns, or if not an immediate connection, I
Mm.
knew a clown who knew them. And so I could kind of like, oh, let's try to get them in. And I tried to have people of different walks,
Yeah. Well, Guilford, thank you so much for coming on Made Possible by Pop Culture today. And as we discussed, your doc American Clown is out on VOD right now. So for anyone listening to or watching this episode of the podcast, go ahead and search your local listings to figure out exactly where to get American Clown, depending on where in the world you are. We also obviously talked about a past pop culture influence, as we always do. Today, that was Mr. Rogers, aka Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the show. And those seasons, well, there's select seasons of that show still available to stream. You can get them on the PBS app, on Pluto TV, or on YouTube. So if you have some time, check those out as well. And of course, come back for another episode of Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast, which I'm going to tell you is going to come a little sooner than usual because we are dropping a second episode this week. We don't usually do that. And that episode, it's for anyone who's interested in British TV, anyone who's interested in Netflix's upcoming story about Marine boot camp in the 1990s titled Boots, or anyone who loves pop culture in general, because we always go on tangents. We always talk about a lot of different things, especially when we're looking at what's in the past. And I'm not going to give away what's in the past on this particular episode. Anyway, I'm Danielle. Again, you can always leave your guesses, leave your hopes and dreams in the comments, and I hope to see you for the next episode very, very soon.